story title, The Cleaner Who Changed Everything. The city of Lagos still asleep while one forgotten man, Jonah Obi, is already at work. This is not just a simple morning scene. It's a symbolic picture of life itself. The world sleeps while the poor keep it running. Jonah, an old cleaner in a large innovation lab, moves silently through the workshop, his mop echoing in the emptiness. His uniform is faded, his boots cracked, yet he works with calm devotion. No one remembers when he was hired, and no one ever notices his effort. But he keeps showing up. The description of the factory is cinematic and heavy with atmosphere, the metallic smell of oil, the mist rolling through neon light, spilled coolant shining like a mirror. These images are not just visual. They mirror Jonah's quiet endurance. The grease and oil symbolize the hard, dirty layers of life that cover unseen wisdom. The mirror of spilled liquid reflects a truth that hides beneath society's surface, a truth that brilliance often overlooks. Inside the same space, 100 young engineers, all highly educated, have been trying for 2 years to build a revolutionary hybrid engine. They have failed again and again. The lab feels exhausted, littered with coffee cups, papers, and broken confidence. Their leader, Michael Adeyemi, represents pride and modern intellect, sharp but fragile. When he shouts, "We've tried everything," it captures the arrogance and desperation of those who think knowledge only belongs to the educated. In this chaos, Jonah quietly observes their failed prototype. He bends over it, not as a scientist, but as a man who's repaired old generators in the slums to feed his children. His eyes notice something simple, a loose valve, a slightly misaligned piston, something the trained engineers missed. This is the emotional core of the scene. The forgotten man sees what the brilliant cannot. Jonah doesn't touch the machine or call attention to himself. He simply sighs, not from arrogance, but from humility. His whispered line, "If only they could listen to the sound an engine makes before it fails," carries double meaning. Literally, it shows his mechanical intuition. He understands machines by their rhythm, by sound, not by formulas. But morally, it means something deeper. People fail because they stop listening, to machines, to others, to their own conscience. It's a beautiful line of wisdom from a man the world considers uneducated. Then, as sunlight hits his rough, wrinkled hands, they look like circuits. That image is powerful. It says that real intelligence isn't always written on paper. Sometimes it's carved into the hands of those who work. Jonah's hands are living proof that knowledge born from experience can be more valuable than theory. There was a sound of tools clinking in a small mechanic shop in Ajigunle, Lagos. The image of the rusted zinc roof, the leaking rainwater, and the smell of burnt fuel gives a feeling of struggle mixed with dignity. Jonah was not just surviving, he was creating. The photograph of his wife, Martha, and son, Chibik, hanging on the wall showed the small world he lived for, and that one photo becomes the center of his soul, the reason he worked, the reason he endured. Then, the story begins to break the audience's heart. Martha's sickness changes everything. The pain of not having enough money to save the one he loves is a silent scream that every poor man understands. When he sells his tools, especially the wrench he once bought with pride, it feels like he is selling apart his dream. The line about her breath fading, like a weak generator running out of fuel, connects his life's work to his personal tragedy. It's poetic and haunting at the same time. The fire that destroys his workshop becomes a turning point. It isn't just a fire that burns his shop. It burns his identity, his name, his pride. The image of the spark hitting the leaking fuel feels both real and symbolic, as if fate itself conspired to end what little he had left. When everything turns to ashes and only the wrench survives, it becomes a symbol of Jonah himself, black and damaged but not destroyed. His line, "Engines can die, but hands that build must keep moving," shows quiet resilience. It's not just a line. It's a life philosophy that defines his strength. After this fall, he walks from Ajigunle to Ikeja, from being known to being invisible. Taking the job as a cleaner at Aerodyne feels humiliating, but he accepts it without bitterness. This humility, the silent acceptance, makes the audience respect him deeply. Every time he watches the engineers argue, there's a silent ache inside him, not jealousy, but recognition. He knows what they are missing, not because he is smarter, but because he listens differently. The The wrench he carries is his link to the past. To everyone else, it's just a piece of metal. But for Jonah, it's his memory, his loss, his promise. When the story says he studies broken parts at night under a flickering bulb, it paints a cinematic image, an old man surrounded by silence, rebuilding the dream the world took away. The way he hears how metal breathes is not about mechanics alone. It's about life. He understands failure the way a man understands pain, from experience. Jonah is doing what he always does, mopping the floor, humming an old hymn. But this time, someone notices him. Ruth, a young intern with bright eyes and genuine curiosity, becomes the first person to break through Jonah's wall of invisibility. Her small good morning, sir, feels bigger than it sounds. It's the first time in years anyone has spoken to him with respect. Jonah's polite answer, calling her madam, shows his natural humility and kindness, while her laugh adds warmth, a small human moment in a cold, mechanical world. The conversation that follows feels magical without trying to be. Ruth's frustration with the failing engine opens a door for Jonah's quiet wisdom to enter. His line, "Maybe the problem no be the fire, maybe it's the breath," is both poetic and deeply insightful. He's not talking like an engineer. Yet he says something that goes straight to the truth. The metaphor of breath humanizes a machine. It makes the audience feel that even metal needs balance, just like people do. It's a moment that reveals the soul of Jonah, a man who understands life through the rhythm of work and sound. Ruth's curiosity makes the viewer smile, because she represents open-minded youth, someone who listens without judgment. When Jonah says, "Truth no day wear big grammar, it just day stand small," it becomes one of those lines that would echo beautifully in a YouTube narration. It's simple, real, and wise. The kind of quote that audiences would remember and share, the moment Ruth secretly tests Jonah's idea that night brings emotional satisfaction. The viewer can almost hear the hum of the machine, smoother than before. Her excitement feels pure, and Jonah's disbelief the next morning when she tells him, "It worked a little," is touching. It's not just that his idea worked. It's that, for the first time in years, someone believed in him enough to try. That's the emotional heartbeat of this section. Recognition. Their growing friendship feels natural and deeply cinematic. The image of Ruth leaving her sketches near his cleaning area and Jonah making small pencil corrections at night is visually beautiful. Two worlds quietly crossing without ever announcing it. These little exchanges are filled with humanity and trust. There's no romance here, but something even more meaningful. Connection between forgotten wisdom and young curiosity. When the prototype finally hums without stalling and Ruth whispers, "Maybe the answer doesn't wear a lab coat," it becomes the section's emotional climax. It's not just a statement about the engine. It's a truth about the world. Jonah's soft reply, "Maybe the world just gets to look down sometimes," wraps the scene in gentle pain and quiet pride. Days folded into weeks, and within Aerodyne's walls, something subtle yet powerful began to shift. Failures still came, but softer now, as if the stubborn machines had begun to respect human patience. Ruth, the bright young intern, started to notice Jonah, the quiet janitor who never rushed, who cleaned near the prototypes as though he were listening to them breathe. She saw patterns in his silence, purpose in his pauses. Sometimes during her lunch breaks, she would sit outside the lab on the cool concrete steps, sharing her jollof rice wrapped in foil. Jonah would always hesitate at first, embarrassed by the idea. "Ah, madam, I no fit chop with you. People go talk." And she would laugh softly. Let them talk. Engineers need cleaners more than they admit. Those lunches became small sanctuaries of truth. They spoke about life and loss, about faith and machines. Ruth told him she was raised by her grandmother in Surrey, that she wanted to build something that truly mattered. Jonah told her he once had a small workshop in Adjugunal before a fire burned it to ashes. "You never gave up," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "When life burned your house, he just did teach you how to live without roof." Their connection was not romance. It was soul meeting soul across class, age, and pain. But the world is rarely kind to such purity. One afternoon, Michael Adeyemi, the sharp-tongued project lead, walked in unexpectedly. He froze. Ruth and Jonah were bent over a schematic, heads close, whispering ideas. "Ruth." His voice cracked like a whip. What's this? Ruth straightened. I was just getting another perspective. Michael's laugh was dry, cruel. From the cleaner? Jonah lowered his eyes, gripping his mop like a shield. Yes, Ruth replied, her voice trembling but firm. Sometimes perspective matters more than titles. Michael's face hardened. This is an engineering lab, not a storytelling circle. Keep the janitorial staff out of technical work. Jonah tried to speak, but Michael silenced it with a glare and stormed out, leaving shame thick in the air. That evening, Jonah sat alone outside, polishing an old wrench that had survived the fire. Ruth joined him quietly. I'm sorry, she said. He shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Jonah only smiled faintly. He no talk anything new. People fear when no fit inside their certificate. Ruth sighed. Still, I'll keep learning from you. Quietly. He looked at her, voice low and calm. If you go walk this road, walk him with sense. The world no like when truth come from small mouth or dirty hands. From that moment, the air around them changed. Michael began questioning Ruth's work in meetings, cutting her off, taking credit for her discoveries. The other engineers whispered when she passed. Rumors spread. The intern and the cleaner working late nights, sharing secrets. Yet in the silence of those late hours, Ruth and Jonah pressed on. She ran tests. He listened to hum of the engine like a heartbeat. When it coughed, he'd murmur, too much breath on the left side. Ruth would adjust, and the numbers improve. IT was then Ruth realized, genius isn't taught, it's felt. And Jonah's gift, raw and spiritual, was something beyond science. But even she could sense the storm gathering. One evening, as Ruth packed her things, the elderly security guard, Mama Tio, called out softly, Be careful, my child. Gold that shines too bright can burn your hand. Ruth paused. You mean Jonah? Mama Teo shook her head. I mean truth. It never stays hidden. When it comes out, people either kneel or destroy it. That night, thunder rolled over Lagos. The rain returned, wild and heavy. Inside the lab, the machine still breathed, but the peace was over. The storm had begun, and the truth Ruth and Jonah carried together was about to challenge everything Aerodyne stood for. The morning began with promise, the kind that feels almost divine. Inside Aerodyne's glass-walled lab, the entire team gathered for the long-awaited breakthrough test. For the first time in years, every number on the screen lined up: pressure, exhaust, balance. Perfect harmony. Ruth stood near the back, her heart thudding against her ribs. She had barely slept, replaying every calculation, every adjustment. Jonah, as always, stood at a distance, a mop in his hand, his eyes fixed on the machine like a man watching his child take its first breath. Michael Adeyemi, sharp in a gray suit, addressed the investors who had flown in from Abuja. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared proudly, today, you'll witness the future of energy, the world's first fully stable hybrid engine. Polite applause. Cameras ready. The air was thick with oil, sweat, and anticipation. The ignition button was pressed. The engine coughed twice, then roared to life, steady, deep, alive. The room exploded in cheers. Engineers hugged. Michael raised his hands to the crowd, basking in the noise. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She looked across the room. Jonah stood still, tears glinting in his eyes. For once, the man who had given everything in silence allowed himself a small, fragile smile. But joy in that place was never meant to last. During the press briefing that followed, Michael stood before the cameras, holding the schematic. This innovation, he said confidently, is the result of my leadership and the brilliance of our engineering team. Applause followed, but Ruth froze. Her name wasn't mentioned. The breath balance correction, the soul of the design, gone. And Jonah? Erased completely. Across the room, Jonah stood motionless, his head bowed, his hands tight around the mop handle. No anger, no words, just silence. Later that night, when the investors had gone and the lab was quiet again, Ruth entered Michael's office, trembling with contained fury. Why didn't you mention it? She demanded. The airflow correction. It fixed the problem. You know exactly where it came from. Michael didn't even flinch. You're out of line, Ruth. No, she said, voice cracking. That idea wasn't mine alone. Jonah, enough? Michael slammed the desk. You're giving credit to a janitor? To someone who doesn't even belong in this conversation? You'll embarrass the company. Ruth's eyes burned. He understood the machine better than all of us. Michael leaned back, his tone turning icy. If you want to keep your job, you'll forget this. And if you speak of it again, you'll never work in this field. Ruth left the building in tears. The Lego skyline shimmered through her vision, lights blurring, heartbreaking, but Jonah stayed. He stayed behind in the empty lab, sweeping slowly around the machine that had been his silent masterpiece. His reflection shimmered on the steel casing, a man who had given his soul and been erased from his own story. Then he heard them, two engineers near Michael's desk, laughing. Can you imagine? The cleaner thinks he's part of the team. Their laughter cut like glass. Jonah froze. The mop slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a sharp clang that echoed through the hall. He stood still for a long moment, then lowered his head. Something inside him shattered quietly. It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was faith. Faith that truth would one day speak for itself. The next morning, Ruth arrived early. Jonah's locker was empty, his nameplate gone. The only thing left behind was his old, fire-scarred wrench resting on the workbench, a wordless goodbye. Michael passed by, noticed the wrench, and smirked. Good. The cleaner knew his place. But Ruth's tears said otherwise. She picked up the wrench, holding it to her chest. No, she whispered through the ache. The world just doesn't know his worth yet. That moment marked a quiet collapse, the betrayal that burns deeper than failure. A man's genius buried by pride. A woman's conscience caught between truth and fear. And somewhere in the echo of that silent lab, the machine still hummed, breathing with the rhythm of man the world refused to see. The rain had stopped, leaving Legos glowing under broken streetlights. Inside her small apartment in Surrey, Ruth sat alone at her desk. On it lay the blackened wrench Jonah had left behind, a copy of the final schematic, and her laptop. It screamed blank except for the title she'd just typed. Truth in Motion. The forgotten hands behind Aerodyne's engine. Her fingers trembled. Every word she wanted to write felt heavy, dangerous. What if Michael was right? What if no one believed her? A young intern speaking for a janitor. Then she remembered Jonah's quiet voice, the night he told her. Truth no day wear big grammar. He just day stand small, but he day last long. She whispered it again, and something inside her steadied. Then she began to type. The next morning, Ruth didn't go to Aerodyne. She took a Danfo bus to Yaba Tech Innovation Hub, a small building alive with young minds and restless energy. There she met Femi Arins, a fearless tech blogger known for exposing corporate lies. She placed a schematic and a USB drive on his desk. The engine they're celebrating, she said quietly. It wasn't built by who they say it was. Femi leaned back, skeptical. You've got proof? I've got everything, she said. The USB held timestamps, work logs, prototype edits. Every detail proving the breath balance modification was done during late-night sessions with Jonah present. It even had CCTV footage showing him inside the lab when no one else was there. Femi stared at the evidence, then at her. You realize this could destroy their whole reputation? Ruth exhaled slowly. It's not about destruction. It's about truth. He nodded, impressed. You're brave. She smiled faintly. No, just tired of lies. Meanwhile, at Aerodyne, Michael Adeyemi was the new face of success. Posters showed his smiling face beside the words, Africa's innovation leader. Investors praised him. Interviews poured in, and he was set to present the revolutionary hybrid engine at the African Tech Conference. But the cracks began to show. The engine, Jonah's engine, started to fail. It sputtered during testing. The readings unstable. Engineers panicked. Sir, the airflow metrics keep collapsing. It's breathing wrong, one stammered. Michael's voice was sharp. Recalibrate. Again. They tried and failed. The engine coughed, then died. That same evening, Femi's article went live. The Invisible Engineer. How a Legos cleaner solved what 100 engineers couldn't. Within hours, it went viral. Hashtags spread across social media. Hashtag Jonah Obi, hashtag wisdom in work boots, hashtag truth in motion, hashtag the cleaner who fixed in Nigeria, woke up to the story of a humble janitor whose insight had achieved what educated experts could not. The nation was moved. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about recognition, humility, and justice. A Aerodyne chaos broke loose. Investors demanded answers. The board called emergency meetings. Michael tried to laugh it off. Fake news, he said, an emotional lie from a bitter intern. But the evidence was undeniable. The CCTV footage, the logs, the signatures, all pointed back to Jonah. Then Ruth stepped into the spotlight. At a small press conference, she spoke clearly, her voice trembling only once. His name is Jonah Obi. He swept your floors. He carried your coffee. But he also fixed your engine. And you never looked down long enough to see him. The hall went silent. Every journalist in the room knew they were witnessing something bigger than a scandal. They were watching the rebirth of truth. That night, Michael received a call. He was suspended, pending investigation. The empire he built on arrogance began to crumble. While the world debated, Ruth quietly boarded a bus to Adjugunle. She found Jonah sitting outside a small repair shed, working on an old generator, the same steady hands that had once touched the future. He looked up and smiled softly. Ah, the engineer. She showed him her phone, his name shining across headlines. Everyone knows now, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Jonah chuckled gently. No, or just talk. They believe you, she whispered. They finally do. He paused, eyes on the ground. Belief is good, but peace is better. Ruth smiled through tears. You deserve both. That night, as the streets glimmered under faint streetlights, Ruth knew that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. The truth that once hid in the shadows of janitor's broom now stood tall under the light of an awakened city. And somewhere, deep inside the hum of the broken engine, the rhythm of Jonah's quiet genius still lived. Steady, patient, eternal. IT was a morning everyone had been waiting for. The Aerodyne board hearing. The air outside the glass towers of Victoria Island was heavy with silence and anticipation. Crowds had gathered, journalists, engineers, activists, and ordinary people who had followed the story online. Placards waved in the air. Respect every worker. Wisdom has no uniform. Justice for Jonah Obi. Inside the boardroom, tension thickened like smoke. Cameras blinked red, ready to stream the truth across the nation. On one side sat Ruth Daniels, calm but firm in a gray suit. Across from her, Michael Adeyemi, the celebrated CEO, looked confident, his lawyers whispering beside him. He thought this was just another meeting he could control. Then the door opened. Jonah Obi walked in. He wasn't wearing his janitor's uniform this time. Just a clean white shirt, simple, honest. And in his hand, the old wrench he had once left behind. The room fell silent. Even the clicking of cameras stopped for a second. Michael leaned back with a smirk. So, the legend returns. Jonah's voice was calm, steady. I didn't come for legend, sir. I came for peace. The board chair, Mrs. Ogendype, nodded gently. Mr. Obi, you may speak freely. And Jonah began. He told his story, not with anger, but with quiet truth. He spoke of his night shifts, of listening to hum of the machine, of noticing the imbalance no one else saw. He spoke of how he showed Ruth the idea, how they tested it together, how it worked. Every word carried weight. When he finished, the room was silent again. Michael laughed nervously. So you claim you, a janitor, fixed what our engineers couldn't? Jonah looked at him with calm eyes. I didn't fix it alone, sir. I just listened. Sometimes things speak, if we stop speaking over them. That single line hit harder than any accusation that misses. Ogendype turned to Ruth. Ms. Daniels, can you confirm this? Ruth nodded, her hands trembling slightly. Yes, every word. She slid forward documents, logs, signatures, her personal notes. Then she played the CCTV clip on the screen. Jonah knelt beside the engine in his cleaner's uniform, guiding Ruth with hand gestures. The machine stabilized. The pressure readings went green. And then both of them smiled. It was the moment the truth had lived in silence. When the video ended, the boardroom was frozen. Michael's face turned pale. He stammered, This is out of context. But Mrs. Ogendype raised her hand. Her voice was sharp and final. Enough, Mr. Adeyemi. The evidence is clear. You took credit for work that wasn't yours. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Gasps filled the room. Cameras clicked again, this time to capture justice. Michael slumped back, defeated. Ruth turned to Jonah, tears glistening. He looked at her, nodded, and whispered with quiet power, Truth no day shout. He just stand. Applause filled the room, not loud, but deep and full of respect. Outside, when Jonah and Ruth stepped into the sunlight, the crowd erupted. People cheered. Some cried. A young boy pushed forward, holding a cardboard sign that read, I want to be like Jonah, not rich, just right. I want to be like Jonah, not rich, just right. Jonah smiled softly, placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, Then always do your work well, even when nobody day look. That night, Aerodyne released an official statement. In honor of integrity and innovation beyond rank, we established the Jonah Obi Fellowship for Technical Curiosity, dedicated to those whose ideas rise from unexpected places. Across Nigeria, people celebrated, not just because corruption was punished, but because truth for once had a face. It wasn't a CEO or a scientist or a politician. It was a quiet man with a wrench and an honest heart. Lagos woke up gently that morning, sunlight spilling over rooftops, soft and golden, as if the city itself wanted to start over. The usual chaos hadn't yet begun. In a quiet corner of Ajigunle, inside a small blue-painted shed, Jonah Obi stood before a group of children. They sat on old crates, notebooks open, their faces glowing with curiosity. The smell of engine oil mixed with the scent of fresh bread from a nearby vendor. In Jonah's hands was the old blackened wrench, the same one that had survived fire, betrayal, and loss. He lifted it for the children to see. This, he said softly, is not just a tool. It remembers every mistake I made every time I failed and started again. A real engineer is not the one who builds the biggest machine. It's the one who fixes what's broken in silence. The children listened wide-eyed as the morning light danced on their notebooks. A soft breeze lifted dust from the floor, catching the golden rays like a blessing. A car pulled up outside. Ruth Daniels stepped out, no longer the anxious junior engineer, but a confident leader dressed simply in jeans and a white shirt. She had just come from her new role, head of a youth innovation lab founded by Aerodyne's Reform Board. She stood by the doorway, smiling quietly as she watched Jonah teach. When the class ended, the children scattered into the street, laughing and splashing through puddles. Ruth approached Jonah, holding a small brown wrap package. It's for you, she said. A thank you from a fellowship board. Jonah unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a new wrench, polished gleaming, engraved with his name, Jonah Obi, Builder of Hope. He stared at it for a long time, eyes glistening. Then beside it, he placed his old burnt wrench. One carried the marks of struggle, the other, the shine of renewal. Together, they told his story. Jonah smiled faintly. Martha would have liked this. Ruth nodded, tears in her eyes. She would have been proud. Later, they walked to the small cemetery near the lagoon where Martha was buried. The wind off the water carried faint sounds of traffic, church bells, and laughter. Jonah knelt, placed a new wrench gently on her grave, and whispered, I finally built something that works, my love. Not an engine, a chance. He rose slowly, looking peaceful, not because he had won, but because he had healed. As they walked back through the bustling streets, children waved from doorways, calling, Uncle Jonah, tell a story tomorrow. He raised a hand, laughing softly. Tomorrow, my children, tomorrow. The camera lifts, Legos alive beneath the sky, buses honking, vendors shouting, clouds drifting above a city forever caught between chaos and courage. And somewhere within it, a small workshop hums, steady, human, alive. Because sometimes it takes a man the world called a cleaner to remind everyone how to fix what's broken, not just in machines, but in people. Fade out.